I still remember the day I first walked through my new home. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm patterns across hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly beneath my feet. The house represented everything I had worked for during 15 grueling years as a federal prosecutor: a sanctuary, a reward, a place where I could finally breathe. The neighborhood itself seemed idyllic: tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and a peaceful ambience that felt worlds away from the high-stress environment of federal courtrooms. I spent the first week unpacking, arranging furniture, and transforming the empty house into my personal haven. Each shelf I installed, each picture I hung, reinforced the sense that I had finally found where I belonged. On a crisp Saturday morning, 3 weeks after moving in, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an artificial smile. She introduced herself as Janice Harmon, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. "We are so delighted to have you join our community," she said, her voice clipped and practiced. She extended a thick envelope toward me. "This contains all the information about our HOA, membership details, fee structures, and of course, our comprehensive community guidelines." I accepted the envelope politely but felt immediate hesitation. I had specifically purchased this house because property records indicated it was not part of the HOA jurisdiction. The original development had expanded years after my section was built, and my property had never been formally incorporated. "Thank you for stopping by," I said, "but I believe there has been a misunderstanding. My property is not actually part of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA territory. It was built before the association was established." Janice's smile did not waver, but something flashed behind her eyes. "That is a common misconception with this property. All homes in this area are automatically enrolled. It is for the collective good of maintaining property values." I shook my head gently. "I reviewed the property records thoroughly before purchasing. There is no legal covenant attaching this house to your HOA. While I appreciate the invitation, I must respectfully decline membership." The temperature between us seemed to drop several degrees. Janice maintained her smile, but it no longer reached her eyes. "Perhaps you should review the materials before making a hasty decision. Our community standards have made Oak Ridge Estates one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the county." "I have no doubt you run an excellent organization," I replied, "but my decision is not hasty. It is based on legal fact. My property is not bound by HOA jurisdiction." She left with tight lips and rigid shoulders. I thought that would be the end of it, a minor neighborhood misunderstanding quickly forgotten. I was wrong. The following week, I noticed subtle changes in how neighbors interacted with me. People who had previously waved now averted their eyes. Conversations that had been friendly became curt. Once, while retrieving my mail, I overheard someone refer to me as the non-compliant one, a strange phrase that sounded more appropriate for a dystopian novel than a suburban neighborhood. I began receiving flyers about HOA community events, each with handwritten notes emphasizing the importance of unified neighborhood standards. Then came the pamphlets about property value statistics, conveniently highlighting how non-HOA properties supposedly damaged market values. The passive aggression was palpable. One evening, returning home after a long day in court, I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. Printed on HOA letterhead, it detailed various violations including improper landscape maintenance, unauthorized exterior paint color, and failure to submit renovation plans for approval. At the bottom in bold red letters it stated, "Non-compliance may result in community actions to protect property values." I removed the notice, brought it inside, and added it to a new folder labeled HOA. Something told me this would not be the last such communication. That night, standing at my kitchen window, I noticed a group of neighbors gathered on Janice's driveway. They kept glancing in the direction of my home. I did not need 15 years of legal experience to recognize when I was being discussed. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding was evolving into something more concerning. I had faced down drug lords, corrupt officials, and organized crime figures without flinching. Now, in the place I had chosen for peace, I found myself in an unexpected standoff with a suburban queen and her loyal subjects. Little did they know, standing firm against intimidation was precisely what I had built my career upon. I have always believed in documentation. In my line of work, meticulous record-keeping often made the difference between justice served and justice denied. So when the HOA escalated their pressure tactics, my prosecutorial instincts activated. I began keeping detailed logs of every interaction, every letter, every strange occurrence. The first truly alarming incident occurred 3 weeks after my conversation with Janice. My security camera captured a middle-aged man in a polo shirt methodically measuring my front lawn at 11:43 p.m. He moved with purpose, recording numbers in a small notebook, occasionally glancing toward my darkened windows. I recognized him from HOA promotional materials as Robert Finch, the association's vice president. The following morning, a new violation notice appeared, citing excessive lawn height exceeding community standards by 0.75 inches. The precision of the measurement made the midnight surveillance undeniable. They were not even trying to hide their tactics. The notices increased in frequency and absurdity. I received citations for non-approved mailbox design, despite it being the original fixture that came with the house. Another claimed my exterior paint color, a modest cream tone, was not within approved palette parameters. A particularly creative notice alleged excessive noise pollution on a weekend when I had been out of town for a conference. Each violation included the same threat: non-compliance will result in necessary corrective action by the HOA board. Each one went directly into my growing documentation file. After the fifth notice, I decided a direct approach was warranted. I found Janice overseeing landscape workers at the neighborhood entrance display. Her eyebrows rose slightly when she saw me approaching. "Good morning, Janice. I would like to discuss these notices I have been receiving," I said, keeping my tone professional and measured. "Of course," she replied with that same artificial smile. "We take community standards very seriously here." "I understand the importance of community standards," I said, "but as I previously explained, my property is not legally under HOA jurisdiction. These notices have no binding authority." She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You know, we have had other non-members before. They all eventually understand the benefits of cooperation." "Are you suggesting that these notices will continue regardless of their legal standing?" "I am suggesting that being part of this community means following its rules," she said, her voice hardening. "Member or not, your property affects everyone around you. The community has ways of addressing outliers." The threat was thinly veiled. I maintained eye contact. "I would caution against any actions that might constitute harassment or intimidation. Those carry legal consequences beyond HOA authority." Her smile returned, colder than before. "Goodness, so dramatic. We are simply enforcing standards that everyone else willingly follows. Perhaps you should ask yourself why you insist on being the only problem in an otherwise harmonious neighborhood." That evening, a neighbor I had spoken with only once before approached me while I was collecting my trash bins. She glanced nervously over her shoulder before speaking. "I wanted to warn you," she said quietly. "The Palmers on Oak Street refused to join the HOA last year. Their children were suddenly excluded from neighborhood activities. Their car was keyed twice. Their mail went missing. They sold within 3 months." "That sounds like more than coincidence," I remarked. "Janice has been president for 8 years," she continued. "Those who cooperate have a wonderful experience. Those who do not." She trailed off, then retreated quickly when another neighbor emerged from a nearby house. The next morning provided stark confirmation of the woman's warning. I discovered all 4 tires on my car slashed. The police officer who responded took perfunctory notes but seemed uninterested in pursuing the matter. "No cameras caught the act itself," he explained with a shrug. "Could be random vandalism, happens everywhere." But it did not happen everywhere. It happened to me after I refused to submit to an HOA that had no legal authority over my property. As I arranged for a tow truck, I noticed Janice walking her small dog past my driveway. She paused briefly, making no attempt to hide her inspection of the damage. "Such a shame," she called out. "The neighborhood has been experiencing some troubling incidents lately. The HOA has been discussing hiring private security. Members would be covered, of course." She continued her walk without waiting for a response. The message could not have been clearer: join us or remain vulnerable. They thought they were dealing with a stubborn homeowner who would eventually break under pressure. They had no idea they were escalating a conflict with someone who had built a career confronting intimidation tactics far more sophisticated than theirs. The explosion jolted me from deep sleep, a thunderous boom followed by the distinctive sound of glass shattering and metal warping. I scrambled from bed, disoriented in the darkness, before the orange glow outside my window registered. Fire! My heart hammered against my ribs as I rushed downstairs and flung open the front door. My car was engulfed in flames. The vehicle I had parked in my driveway just hours earlier now resembled a funeral pyre, flames licking the night sky. The heat pushed against me like a physical force, driving me back several steps. The acrid smell of burning rubber and melting plastic filled my lungs. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, forming silent clusters at a safe distance. Their faces illuminated by the flames, expressions unreadable. No one approached me. No one called out to ask if I was all right. The collective silence felt choreographed, as if everyone had been expecting this spectacle. Across the street, standing beneath a perfectly trimmed oak tree, I spotted Janice with two other HOA board members. They made no attempt to conceal their presence or their interest. Their faces showed neither shock nor concern, only a cold, evaluative attention. Janice caught my eye and held it for a long moment before turning to whisper something to her companions. The fire department arrived within minutes, the sirens cutting through the neighborhood's eerie quiet. The firefighters worked efficiently to extinguish the blaze, but it was already too late. My car was destroyed, reduced to a blackened shell on my own property. "Looks like arson," the fire chief told me after the flames were extinguished. "The point of origin suggests an accelerant was used, could have spread to your house if a neighbor had not called it in." I glanced toward the neighbors still watching from their lawns. Did anyone report seeing anything suspicious? The chief shook his head. Nobody saw anything, at least nobody is talking. The police arrived shortly after, but their investigation felt perfunctory at best. The officer taking my statement kept looking past me, his attention elsewhere, his questions minimal. When I mentioned the ongoing HOA dispute, he shifted uncomfortably. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "I understand you are upset, but making accusations against the neighborhood association without concrete evidence could make your situation more difficult." "I am not making accusations," I replied evenly. "I am providing context for what might otherwise appear to be a random act of violence." He sighed. "Between us, there is an unspoken power structure in these planned communities. The department gets a lot of calls from this area, all from HOA members with complaints about community standards. They fund the local business association that supports our department events. I am just saying, tread carefully." The message was clear. I should not expect much help from local authorities. As dawn broke, I stood amid the wreckage of my car, ash clinging to my bare feet, watching as neighbors retreated to their homes now that the entertainment had concluded. The investigation would go nowhere, they all knew it. My insurance company was the next disappointment. The claims adjuster cited pending investigation and prior documented concerns about property negligence as reasons to delay coverage. When pressed, he reluctantly admitted that the HOA had filed multiple complaints about my property, establishing a paper trail of supposed negligence that complicated my claim. "These complaints, although not legally binding since you are not a member, create a situation where we must conduct a more thorough investigation," he explained with rehearsed sympathy. I recognized the strategy immediately. The HOA had systematically created documentation to interfere with any potential insurance claim. They had anticipated this moment, prepared for it. This was not impulsive vandalism. This was calculated intimidation. That night, sitting in my darkened living room, I watched through the window as neighbors strolled past my house, slowing to observe the scorched driveway where my car had stood. Some took photos. Others pointed and conversed in hushed tones. Janice drove by twice, slowing to a crawl both times. I realized then that this conflict had evolved beyond property disputes or petty power plays. They had destroyed my property. They had conspired to obstruct my insurance claim. They were systematically working to break my will and force me out. What they failed to understand was who they were dealing with. For 15 years, I had prosecuted cases against people who believed themselves untouchable, corrupt officials who thought their local influence made them invulnerable, organized crime figures who ruled through fear and intimidation. I had faced threats far more dangerous than suburban tyrants with clipboards and garden shears. The fire that destroyed my car had changed everything. It transformed a neighborhood dispute into a criminal case, and criminal cases were precisely my specialty. The morning after the fire, I made two crucial decisions. First, I would no longer react defensively to the HOA's tactics. Second, I would apply the same methodical approach to this situation that had won me complex federal cases against sophisticated opponents. I began by enhancing my security. In addition to the visible cameras I had installed weeks earlier, I now added several concealed devices strategically positioned to cover my entire property perimeter. These were high-end, government-grade surveillance tools that a former FBI colleague had recommended for witness protection properties, capable of capturing clear images at night and at difficult angles. I established a secure cloud server to store all footage, ensuring the evidence would remain intact even if the physical devices were discovered or damaged. I also installed motion-activated floodlights and a sophisticated alarm system. My home would no longer be an easy target. With security addressed, I turned my attention to intelligence gathering. In federal prosecutions, understanding the opposition's full scope of activities often proved more valuable than focusing solely on the immediate offense. I needed to comprehend the HOA's entire operation, not just their vendetta against me. The neighborhood newsletter announced an upcoming HOA meeting open to all residents, member or not, to discuss community security concerns. The perfect opportunity for reconnaissance. I arrived dressed inconspicuously, took a seat in the back row, and observed. Janice controlled the meeting with practiced authority, steering discussions and subtly shutting down dissenting voices. The treasurer's report revealed annual dues exceeding $150,000, yet financial statements showed vague expenditure categories with minimal detail. When one homeowner requested itemized expense reports, Janice smoothly deflected, promising to make such documentation available upon formal written request. The most revealing moment came during the Community Standards Enforcement segment. Robert Finch, the same man who had measured my lawn at midnight, presented a slideshow of properties of concern. My house featured prominently, with close-up photos highlighting supposed violations. "We have one particular property that continues to degrade community standards," Janice interjected. "The owner has refused reasonable cooperation and now presents a security risk following a suspicious fire. The board is considering legal options to address this ongoing situation." A murmur rippled through the audience. A woman near me whispered to her husband, "They will force compliance just like with the Palmers." After the meeting, I lingered in the parking lot, pretending to take a phone call. Board members gathered near Janice's luxury SUV, speaking freely now that most attendees had departed. "The insurance company is cooperating," Robert said. "They will deny or delay the claim indefinitely. Peterson at the agency owes me after that zoning exception for his lake house addition." "Good," Janice replied. "Financial pressure works. If the fire does not convince our problem resident, the mounting costs will. Nobody can afford to replace a vehicle out of pocket and repair fire damage without insurance coverage." "What if legal action comes back at us?" another board member asked nervously. Janice laughed. "What evidence would there be? Nobody saw anything. The police report shows no suspects. And even if suspicions arise, the association itself has no direct liability. We are simply enforcing community standards through approved channels." I recorded the entire exchange. Their confidence was astonishing and damning. Over the next week, I compiled financial records through public information requests. The HOA was registered as a nonprofit organization, making certain records accessible through proper legal channels. What I found confirmed my suspicions: discrepancies between reported dues collection and actual expenditures, suspicious payments to consulting companies sharing addresses with board members' businesses, and a pattern of selective enforcement against targeted homeowners. Most significantly, I discovered properties that had been forced into foreclosure after sustained HOA pressure, properties subsequently purchased at below-market rates by an investment company partially owned by Janice's husband. Then came the breakthrough that shifted everything. A neighbor, the same woman who had warned me about the Palmers, left an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a copy of what appeared to be HOA meeting minutes from 3 years prior. One paragraph was highlighted. Motion approved to expand HOA jurisdiction to include original development properties through voluntary compliance or progressive enforcement actions. Legal counsel advises obtaining signatures acknowledging HOA authority or creating documentation demonstrating implied consent through payment of any fees or acceptance of services. This explained their strategy. They were attempting to manufacture my consent to their authority. Every notice, every interaction was designed to eventually trick me into acknowledging their jurisdiction over my property. The fire was simply an escalation of this strategy, break me down until I surrendered my independence. That night, I reviewed everything I had gathered: surveillance footage, financial discrepancies, recorded conversations, documented harassment, and now evidence of a deliberate scheme to fraudulently expand HOA territory. The picture was complete. Janice and her board had built a small-scale criminal enterprise disguised as a homeowners association. They had used intimidation, fraud, and now apparent arson to control their territory and extract profit. They believed their local influence made them untouchable. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Federal prosecutors learn early that timing is everything. Move too soon, your case collapses from insufficient evidence. Move too late, targets have time to cover their tracks. I needed to build an airtight case while maintaining the element of surprise. My first call was to Alina Vasquez, a trusted colleague in the white-collar crimes division. Without revealing my personal involvement, I described the situation as a potential case deserving federal attention. Small-scale racketeering through a neighborhood association, Alina sounded skeptical at first, seems below federal threshold. The pattern suggests organized fraud across state lines, I countered, explaining how the HOA's financial connections extended to investment properties in neighboring states, plus potential mail fraud, insurance fraud, evidence of coordinated intimidation, and possibly arson as enforcement. Her interest peaked. Send me what you have. No promises, but I will take a preliminary look. With Alina conducting background investigation through official channels, I focused on gathering additional evidence. I created a fake identity as a potential homebuyer, complete with a temporary phone number and email address. I contacted the neighborhood's primary realtor, the same one who had sold several of the foreclosed properties tied to Janice's husband's investment company. I am particularly interested in understanding the HOA structure before committing, I explained during our call. What properties fall under their jurisdiction? All homes in Oak Ridge Estates are covered by the HOA, the realtor assured me. It is what maintains our property values and community standards. Even the original development sections, I heard some might be exempt. That was true years ago, she replied confidently, but the association now covers all properties. Everyone participates. It is mandatory with purchase. I had her explicit misrepresentation recorded. Next, I arranged an in-person tour of a property 3 doors down from my own home. When we passed my house, I feigned interest. That property seems well maintained. Is it also part of the HOA? The realtor hesitated briefly. Yes, all properties here are under HOA management, even though it was built before the association existed. She lowered her voice. Between us, that homeowner has been difficult about acknowledging HOA authority. There have been issues, but the association president assures me the situation will be resolved soon. I would not worry about it affecting neighboring property values. Another explicit misrepresentation captured on my concealed recording device. The evidence was mounting. Through Alina's official channels, we subpoenaed banking records from the HOA accounts and the linked investment company. The financial trail revealed systematic fraud, inflated vendor contracts with kickbacks, misappropriation of dues for personal expenses, and strategic acquisition of properties devalued through HOA enforcement actions. My security cameras continued yielding critical evidence. 3 nights after my meeting with the realtor, they captured Robert Finch and another board member on my property at 1:38 a.m., examining the fire damage to my driveway and taking photographs. The trespassing was blatant, their conversation clearly audible through my enhanced audio capture system. "Janice wants daily updates on whether the car has been replaced," Robert said. "She thinks our friend might be reaching breaking point." "The insurance company is still stalling as instructed," his companion replied. "Another week or 2 should do it." The next morning, I filed for an emergency restraining order against all HOA board members, citing documented trespassing, harassment, and threatening behavior. The local judge, perhaps recognizing the evidence was too substantial to ignore, granted the order immediately. When the sheriff's deputy served Janice with the restraining order during her morning garden routine, neighbors watched from behind curtains and partially opened doors. The HOA president's reaction, captured by at least 3 of my cameras, was a mixture of shock and indignation. The power dynamic had visibly shifted. Within hours, my phone began ringing. First Elena, confirming that the financial evidence warranted formal investigation. Then board members, suddenly eager to clarify misunderstandings and work toward amicable resolution. Their panic was palpable. The predators had become prey. I declined all contact attempts, directing them to communicate only through proper legal channels. Meanwhile, I finalized my comprehensive evidence package: surveillance footage, financial documentation, recorded misrepresentations, witness statements from intimidated neighbors, and detailed timeline of escalating harassment culminating in the destruction of my vehicle. The trap was set, now it was time to spring it. The federal investigation moved with impressive efficiency once formally initiated. Elena assigned Special Agent Marcus Chen, who specialized in local government corruption cases. Within days, he had established a temporary field office in a nearby commercial district and assembled a small but focused investigative team. I provided Agent Chen with my complete evidence package, over 300 pages of documentation, 40 hours of surveillance footage, and 17 recorded conversations. His initial review confirmed what I had already concluded. This was not merely an overzealous homeowners association, but a sophisticated racketeering operation using the HOA structure as legal cover. "This is methodical," Chen remarked during our first official meeting. "The way they created artificial property devaluations, manipulated foreclosures, then acquired properties through apparently unrelated investment entities. This shows planning and coordination beyond typical HOA overreach." The investigation expanded rapidly as federal authorities exercised powers beyond what I could access as an individual. Financial warrants revealed the full scope of the scheme: nearly $1.2 million in misappropriated HOA funds over 8 years, systematic fraud in contracting, and evidence of bribes to local officials for selective code enforcement against targeted properties. Janice was the first board member summoned for questioning. She arrived at the federal building projecting confidence, accompanied by an attorney from a prominent local firm. Agent Chen later told me she maintained her composure through initial questioning, dismissing allegations as misunderstandings, and characterizing me as a disgruntled homeowner with personal grievances. Her demeanor reportedly changed when agents presented bank records showing payments from HOA accounts to her personal credit cards, vacation properties registered under her maiden name paid for with association funds, and text messages to the insurance adjuster handling my claim. "The color drained from her face," Chen recounted. Her attorney requested a break, and when they returned, her entire strategy had shifted to damage control. Within days, lower-level board members began cooperating with investigators, each seeking to minimize personal exposure by providing evidence against others. Robert Finch was particularly forthcoming once shown video of his trespassing on my property. He provided detailed accounts of how Janice directed harassment campaigns against non-compliant homeowners and orchestrated the systematic falsification of records. Local media caught wind of the investigation when federal agents executed search warrants at the homes of all 7 HOA board members simultaneously. The headline in the county newspaper read, "Federal investigation targets Oak Ridge Estates HOA, fraud, intimidation allegations surface." The story spread quickly through local television and regional news outlets. Neighbors who had participated in my isolation now avoided eye contact when they passed my home. Several sent anonymous notes of apology, claiming they had acted out of fear of becoming targets themselves. The HOA's attorney called an emergency community meeting to address concerning rumors and maintain neighborhood stability. I attended, accompanied by Agent Chen as a professional courtesy. The community clubhouse was filled beyond capacity, with residents standing along walls and spilling onto the patio outside. The attorney attempted to downplay the situation, characterizing the investigation as procedural review of administrative practices. His carefully crafted message collapsed when Janice burst into the room halfway through the meeting, clearly distraught. "They are freezing our accounts," she shouted, seemingly unaware of the packed audience until after her outburst. "They cannot do this to us, we built this community." The attorney tried to usher her outside, but she pulled away, pointing directly at me. "This is your fault. You and your federal friends think you can come in and destroy everything we built." Agent Chen stood. "Mrs. Harmon, I strongly advise you not to make statements that could be construed as threats against a federal witness." The term federal witness rippled through the room like an electric current. The community was learning in real time that this was not a minor administrative review but a serious criminal investigation. The attorney finally managed to remove Janice, but the damage was done. The carefully constructed image of authority and control had crumbled publicly. Residents immediately began approaching federal agents with their own accounts of HOA abuses, forming a line that stretched outside the clubhouse. 3 days later, federal marshals arrested Janice at her home on multiple charges including mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, extortion, and evidence tampering. The other board members were similarly charged, though several received reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. The local news captured the moment Janice was escorted to a waiting federal vehicle in handcuffs, her perfectly maintained facade finally shattered. The Queen's reign was over. Spring arrived with a symbolism that was not lost on me. As new growth emerged throughout the neighborhood, Oak Ridge Estates itself experienced a rebirth. The federal case against Janice and the HOA board continued through the legal system, but its impact on our community was immediate and transformative. With the HOA accounts frozen pending litigation, the association effectively ceased to exist. The clubhouse remained closed, landscaping services for common areas stopped, and the dreaded violation notices disappeared entirely. For several weeks, uncertainty hung over the neighborhood like morning fog. Then, something remarkable happened. Neighbors began speaking to each other, not through formal complaints or association channels, but directly as people. The community bulletin board that once displayed HOA notices became filled with offers to share gardening tools, recommendations for local services, and invitations to impromptu weekend barbecues. Mrs. Geller, an elderly resident who had received numerous violations for her non-conforming rose garden, expanded it across her entire front yard. The vibrant colors attracted butterflies and admiring neighbors rather than citation notices. The Rodriguez family painted their shutters a bright blue that would have sent Janice into conniptions. A group of children established a lemonade stand without submitting proper permit applications or liability insurance documentation. Small acts of independence flourished throughout the neighborhood. Many residents approached me directly, sharing stories of their own struggles under Janice's regime. Some confessed to participating in my isolation out of fear of becoming targets themselves. Others expressed shame at their silence during escalating harassment. I harbored no resentment. Fear is a powerful motivator, and Janice had weaponized it effectively. I focused my energy on rebuilding, literally and figuratively. The insurance company, suddenly cooperative after federal investigators inquired about their handling of my claim, processed payment for my destroyed vehicle within days. The scorched section of my driveway was removed and replaced. In the adjacent soil, I planted a garden of native wildflowers, colorful, slightly chaotic, and gloriously nonconforming to any prescribed landscape plan. 2 months after the arrests, a small committee of neighbors approached me with a proposal. They wished to establish a new, voluntary neighborhood association focused on actual community needs rather than property control. They asked if I would serve as an advisor to ensure the organization maintained proper legal and ethical boundaries. "We want to get it right this time," explained David Chen, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. "No mandatory fees, no enforcement powers, just neighbors working together on shared priorities." I agreed to help draft foundational documents that explicitly limited the organization's scope and authority. The new Oak Ridge Community Association held its first meeting in my backyard, a deliberate choice that acknowledged past wrongs and symbolized a new beginning. Nearly 60 residents attended, bringing food, drinks, and ideas for genuine community improvement. The contrast with Janice's formal, controlled HOA meetings could not have been more striking. This gathering buzzed with authentic conversation. Residents proposed community garden spaces, a tool-sharing program, and volunteer committees for assisting elderly neighbors with property maintenance. Each suggestion aimed to support rather than control homeowners. Throughout the summer, the community continued its metamorphosis. The once rigid neighborhood transformed into a place where individual expression was celebrated rather than suppressed. Property values, contrary to Janice's dire predictions, remained stable and even increased as word spread about the neighborhood's renewed sense of community. On a crisp autumn morning, as I enjoyed coffee on my front porch, something I rarely did during the height of HOA surveillance, I reflected on how power operates in small spaces. The same human tendencies that corrupt governments and corporations had manifested in our suburban enclave. Unchecked authority, even over something as seemingly inconsequential as lawn height or mailbox design, inevitably breeds abuse. My contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of the mail carrier, who handed me a certified letter among the regular delivery. The return address indicated the U.S. Attorney's Office. Inside was formal notification that Janice had accepted a plea agreement, admitting to multiple federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. The remaining board members had made similar arrangements, with sentencing scheduled for the following month. Justice, in its formal legal sense, had been served. But the true justice was visible all around me, in neighbors chatting across driveways, in the diverse gardens and home improvements that now reflected individual tastes rather than standardized rules, in the laughter of children playing freely on front lawns without fear of violation notices. Later that day, I installed a new mailbox, an admittedly unconventional design featuring hand-painted wildflowers that would have earned immediate censure under the old regime. As I secured it in place, Mrs. Geller walked by with her small dog. "I love your mailbox," she called out. "It brightens the whole street." "Thank you," I replied. "It is not regulation standard." She laughed, a sound of genuine joy. "Thank goodness for that."